NBC executives had one absolute command: Tony and Jeannie can never marry. They can never belong to each other. This prohibition kept the electricity on screen alive for years. But when the director yelled, "Cut!" that electricity didn't disappear. It just changed shape. There was an indescribable hunger in Larry Hagman's eyes when he looked at Barbara. Something not written in the script. The crew never truly knew what happened when the trailer doors closed. All they knew was that the two would remain inside alone for hours. And when they emerged, Larry's eyes held a strange calmness. So, was what happened inside a forbidden passion? Or were they sharing a much more dangerous secret that they wanted no one to hear? One that was slowly consuming them both? To understand the nature of the fire that burned between them, you first have to peel back the layers of the fantasy they were selling. In 1965, America was desperate for an escape. The world was changing rapidly, the news was frightening, and the public wanted magic. They found it in a bottle. I Dream of Jeannie was the perfect confection. Bright colors, canned laughter, and a world where every problem could be solved with the blink of an eye. But the man and woman at the center of this pastel-colored fantasy were living in a reality that was gray, cold, and incredibly fragile. If you looked closely at the screen, past the costumes and the special effects, you could see the cracks. You could see the way Larry Hagman looked at Barbara Eden. It was intense. It was hungry. It wasn't just the look of a co-star. It was the look of a man who was falling off a cliff, staring at the only person who was holding the rope. And Barbara? She didn't look away. She looked back with a mixture of affection and a deep, terrifying devotion. They were two people drowning in the deep end of Hollywood, clinging to each other to stay afloat. Because when the cameras stopped rolling, the magic bottle didn't offer a paradise. It was a prison. And inside that prison, Larry Hagman was screaming without a sound, and Barbara Eden was the only one listening. To understand why they became so dangerously intertwined, you have to understand the ghosts they brought with them to the set. Before they were Tony and Jeannie, they were two lost children of the industry, searching for something the cameras could never give them. Larry Hagman was born into royalty, but he lived like an exile. His mother was Mary Martin, the legendary Broadway star who the world knew as Peter Pan. She was America's sweetheart, the woman who taught a generation how to fly, but she never taught her own son how to land. When Larry was just a boy, Mary chose the stage over the nursery. She chased the applause of strangers and left Larry in the care of grandmothers and boarding schools. He grew up watching his mother love the audience more than she loved him. He sat in the dark theaters, watching her fly on wires, receiving the thunderous love of thousands, while he sat alone in the shadows. He learned a cruel, permanent lesson very early in life. You are only worth something if you are entertaining. If you are quiet, you are invisible. If you are boring, you are abandoned. By the time he reached adulthood, Larry had turned himself into a storm to avoid the silence. He was the wild man. He was loud, he was eccentric, and he was relentlessly charming. He built a personality designed to grab your attention and never let go. He would do anything for a laugh, anything to be the center of gravity in the room. But beneath that manic energy was a gaping void. He was a man screaming to be seen, terrified that if the noise stopped, he would realize he was all alone. He walked into Hollywood with a charm that could disarm anyone, but he was carrying a darkness that was already starting to bleed through the cracks. And then there was Barbara. If Larry was the storm, Barbara was the lighthouse. She was the picture of Hollywood perfection. Disciplined, professional, and breathtakingly beautiful. She had been raised to be the good girl, the reliable one, the woman who smiles through the pain. She had learned the hardest skill in the industry, how to hide your feelings behind a flawless mask. Barbara wasn't just an actress. She was a fixer. She had a natural instinct to smooth over rough edges, to calm the chaos around her. She was drawn to broken things, believing that with enough patience and enough kindness, she could put them back together. She came to the I Dream of Jeannie auditions looking for a co-star. She didn't know she was about to meet the project of a lifetime. The producers didn't want Larry. They looked at him and saw trouble. He was too edgy, too unpredictable for a wholesome sitcom. They wanted a safe, square-jawed American hero. But Barbara saw something else. When Larry walked into the room, the air shifted. There was a vibrating energy to him, a sense of danger that was magnetic. When they read the lines together, she felt it, that spark. It wasn't just professional chemistry. It was a recognition. She looked past the bravado and saw the frightened boy hiding inside the man. And Larry? He looked at her and saw the one thing he had craved his entire life. Unconditional acceptance. Barbara fought for him. She told the executives, "He is the one. I won't do it without him." It was a victory for the show, but it was the beginning of a complex tragedy for her. She had just volunteered to be the guardian of a man who was already holding a lit match. Filming began, and the atmosphere on stage 5 changed immediately. The chemistry was undeniable. The premise of the show, a powerful woman who voluntarily submits to the will of a mortal man, was a strange dynamic, but off-screen, it was even stranger. Larry loved the role of master. It fed that starving part of his ego that needed to be in control. But in reality, he was the one who was dependent. He began to cling to Barbara with an intensity that unnerved those around them. He needed to know where she was at all times. Between takes, his eyes would follow her across the soundstage, tracking her movement like a radar. He would invent reasons to touch her, adjusting her costume, brushing a stray hair from her face, holding her arm a second too long after the director called cut. The crew whispered that it was sexual tension. And it was. The air between them crackled with it. But it wasn't the kind of tension that leads to a romantic dinner. It was the tension of a wire being pulled until it's about to snap. I want to pause here for a second because I think we've all known someone like Larry. Someone who shines so bright but carries such a heavy shadow. Or maybe you relate more to Barbara, the one who always tries to hold everything together for everyone else. It's exhausting, isn't it? If this story is resonating with you, if you can feel the weight of what they were carrying, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us so much to keep digging up these deep, untold human stories. And if you want to be part of our community where we look beyond the scandal and find the soul, please hit that subscribe button. We have so many more stories like this to share with you. Now, let's go back to stage 5 where the laughter was about to stop. As the first season turned into the second, the shadows began to lengthen. Larry started bringing a thermos to the set every morning. He told people it was coffee. Then he said it was tea. But by 10 a.m., his speech would slur just slightly. By lunch, his eyes would turn glassy. The wild man wasn't just fun anymore. He was becoming volatile. The executives were nervous. The directors were frustrated. But Barbara didn't judge him. She didn't lecture him. When the demons started to crawl out, she didn't run away. She stepped closer. This is where the whispers became loudest. When Larry would spiral, when the pressure became too much and the mask started to slip, he would retreat to his trailer. And Barbara would go with him. The door would lock. The set would go silent, waiting. Inside those small, cramped walls, it wasn't a sordid affair. It was something far more intimate. It was an emergency room for the soul. Larry would unravel. The confident astronaut would dissolve into a weeping, terrified mess, confessing his fears, his anger at his mother, his terror of being a fraud. And Barbara would listen. She would hold him, calm him, put the pieces back together just enough so he could walk out that door and face the cameras again. This created a bond between them that was deeper than friendship and more complicated than romance. Larry began to look at Barbara not just as a co-star, but as his oxygen. He needed her to breathe. The sexual energy that the audience felt was actually the intensity of his need. He wanted to possess her stability because he had none of his own. But a relationship built on rescue is a dangerous thing. Barbara thought she was saving him. She thought her love, her platonic, protective, fierce love, was enough to keep the darkness at bay. She didn't realize that you can't save someone who is determined to drown. You can only hold them until they pull you under with them. By 1968, the fantasy was beginning to rot. On television screens across America, Major Nelson and Jeannie were still the epitome of playful romance. But on the soundstage, the air had turned poisonous. The protective cocoon Barbara Eden had built around Larry Hagman was no longer enough to hold back the storm. The wild man was gone, replaced by a man who was terrified of his own shadow, lashing out at the world before it could hurt him. The crew walked on eggshells. Directors were fired. Scripts were thrown. Larry would arrive on set vibrating with a manic, dark energy, his breath smelling of the tea in his thermos. He began to demand strange things, wearing bizarre costumes to set just to provoke a reaction, screaming at the writers that the scripts were garbage, that he was garbage. It was a cry for help that sounded like a roar of aggression. And in the center of this hurricane stood Barbara. She was the only one who could walk into the eye of the storm without getting cut. When Larry would lock himself in his dressing room, refusing to come out, threatening to burn the whole production down, the producers wouldn't call security. They would call Barbara. She would walk to his door, the good girl of Hollywood, and she would talk the madman down. Inside that room, the dynamic shifted. The anger would drain out of him, leaving only a shaking, vulnerable child. He would weep in her arms, confessing that he wasn't good enough, that he was a fraud, that his mother still didn't care. Barbara held him, absorbing his pain, becoming the vessel for his trauma. It was an intimacy far more draining than sex. She wasn't his lover. She was his emotional life support. And every time she saved him, she tethered herself tighter to a sinking ship. The tension on set became unbearable. The studio executives had enough. They drafted the paperwork to fire Larry Hagman. They wanted to replace him, to bring in a new, stable actor to play Major Nelson. It would have saved the show. It would have saved Barbara. But when she heard the news, she didn't feel relief. She felt a fierce, irrational protectiveness. She told the executives, "You can't replace him. He is the show. If he goes, I go." She saved his career, but in doing so, she sealed their fate. They were locked together now, accomplices in a beautiful disaster. But the network had one final blow to deliver, one that would destroy the delicate balance they had maintained. In the final season, NBC decided to do the forbidden. They ordered Tony and Jeannie to get married. Barbara fought it. Larry fought it. They knew instinctively that the sexual tension, the will they, won't they dance, was the only thing keeping the magic alive. But they also knew something else. The marriage on screen would force them to confront the reality off screen. If the characters were happy and settled, where did that leave the actors who thrived on the chaos? The wedding episode aired. The mystery was gone. And just as they predicted, the ratings plummeted. The show was canceled. The bottle was smashed. For Barbara, the end of I Dream of Jeannie was a heartbreak, but also a release. She could finally step out of the harem pants and breathe. But for Larry, the silence was deafening. Without the daily structure of the show, without Barbara's constant presence to ground him, he went into a freefall. He didn't just lose a job, he lost his keeper. They went their separate ways. Barbara continued her career, fighting to be seen as more than just a genie. Larry, however, found a new mask, one that fit his demons perfectly. He became J.R. Ewing in Dallas. If Major Nelson was the man Larry wanted to be, heroic, loved, in control, J.R. Ewing was the man Larry felt he truly was, ruthless, manipulative, and powerful. Dallas made him the biggest star in the world. He had achieved the fame his mother had, the applause he had chased since childhood. But the void was still there. On the set of Dallas, the thermos was replaced by bottles of expensive champagne. He was drinking 5 bottles a day, pickling his liver, numbing the silence that fame couldn't fill. Barbara watched from a distance. She saw her old friend conquering the world, but she knew the cost. They would cross paths at events, and the cameras would flash, capturing the reunion of the perfect couple. They would smile, hug, and play the part. But in those brief moments, when they looked into each other's eyes, the old current was still there. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a shared scar. Larry would look at her with a mixture of pride and regret, a silent acknowledgement that she had seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. But time is a debt collector, and eventually it came for Larry Hagman. In the 1990s, the years of abuse caught up with him. His liver failed. The invincible J.R. Ewing was suddenly mortal. He underwent a life-saving transplant, a second chance. For a while, it seemed he had beaten the odds again. He became an advocate for organ donation, he stopped drinking, he found a semblance of peace. But the body keeps the score. In 2012, Larry was dying. Throat cancer and leukemia were claiming the final curtain call. As he lay in his hospital bed in Dallas, surrounded by family, the memories of a 50-year career drifted by. But one face remained constant. Barbara Eden didn't just send flowers. When the news broke that the end was near, the connection that had started in a casting office in 1965 pulled tight one last time. She spoke of him not as a co-star, but as a part of her own soul. Larry Hagman passed away on November 23, 2012. When Barbara heard the news, the statement she released wasn't the standard Hollywood press release. It was a cry of grief. "I still cannot believe that he is gone," she said. His element was pure energy. But the real tragedy of their story isn't that they never slept together. It isn't that they were star-crossed lovers kept apart by circumstances. The tragedy is that they were exactly what the other needed, but at the wrong time in the wrong world. Larry needed a mother. Barbara needed someone to save. He needed a rock. She needed a purpose. They found those things in each other, but the cost was their own peace of mind. For 5 years, they lived on the edge of a precipice. The sexual tension the world saw was actually the adrenaline of survival. They didn't cross the line into a physical affair because that would have been too simple, too ordinary. What they had was a trauma bond, forged in the high-pressure cooker of fame, sealed with the secrets of addiction, and protected by a love that dared not speak its name. Today, Barbara Eden still smiles that perfect, dazzling smile. She speaks fondly of her master. But if you look closely at the interviews, when Larry's name comes up, there is a flicker in her eyes. It's the look of a woman who remembers the storm. She didn't save him. Ultimately, no one can save anyone. But she held his hand while he walked through the fire. And sometimes, in the lonely world of Hollywood, that is the most intimate act of all. Did they want to sleep with each other? Perhaps. But they did something much more dangerous. They survived each other. Thank you for watching this story with me. It's hard to look at the shiny surface of old sitcoms and realize the pain that was hiding underneath, isn't it? But I think honoring their struggle makes their work even more beautiful. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real lives of Hollywood icons, please subscribe to the channel. I pour my heart into researching these stories because I believe you deserve to know the truth behind the glamour. Leave a comment below. Do you think Barbara should have walked away? Or did she do the right thing by staying? I read every single comment and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep looking beyond the spotlight.